welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to go over how to sew this thing and put it all together. The very first thing you should do is cut out your skirt if you have not cut it out. I am using a chiffon fabric. It is extremely lightweight and transparent, as you can see. So with that being said, I'm going to be using lining to go with it. The lining that I am using as well is cotton, so it'll be it's lightweight too. I like using cotton lining because it makes it's nicer on me. It doesn't make me sweat as much as the polyester does. But anyway, go ahead and measure out your fabric and cut it across. Make sure everything's nice and even, and you can put that aside. Same for the lining. And once you're done with that, you're gonna cut out the actual bodice. You will need 4 of the back pieces and 1 of the front. Now the front, as you can see, it is cut on fold, so the fold will be at the actual neckline. With that being said, the main fabric is going to be used as the lining. So make sure that everything is placed nice and neat and that you're on grain so that when you cut, everything falls in place. Once you're done, you should have 1 for the center front, 4 for the center back, 1 zipper, some straps, and if you're using something for the waistline, you should have that too. Your shell fabric for the skirt as well as your lining. To get started with the sewing, I personally like to sew all of my vertical seams first. So those are all the seams that are going up and down, with the exception of the one like whether it is a closure. Now the closure for this will be in the center back of the skirt, so the bodice itself will be closed all the way. So use some pins, pin them all up, and once you're ready, you start sewing them together. Once all the seams are sewn vertically, it should look a little something like this. I went ahead and pressed the seams open with my fingers. If your iron is near, then by all means just iron it down. Don't be lazy like me, where you're actually just using your fingers to press it open. Go ahead and pin them in place just so that you have the placement of what goes where, and you're able to pin it so that way when the time is ready, it's already in place. But once you're done pinning and you're done pressing open the seams, you can cut out your straps. I decided to have 2 straps instead of just 1. One would go over my shoulder, the other one I kind of just wanted to hang over like an off-shoulder strap. It didn't work out too well, only because the off-shoulder strap, it was not weight enough for it to stay in place, so it kind of like crinkled a bit, but I'll embellish it at a later time just so that it has the effect that I was going for. Once you have cut the straps to the length that you want, you can go ahead and insert it so that it goes where it needs to go. Now, I came to realize that it was easier for me to attach them all to the front and then go back and sew the center back. But it's up to you. As long as you have them going into the right direction, that's all that matters. From there, you can sew straight across horizontally. Be sure to keep your seams open when you cross over from the center back to the center front. That side seam, make sure that your seams are open, and then from there back stitch so that you can keep that strap in place. Those stitches are very important, that they're secure and that you back stitch on them, because if that strap comes out, it is very hard for you to get it back in there. So do not forget to back stitch. stitching is done, turn it inside out so that the center front is facing the right way. As far as the center back, you can leave it as is. You don't have to turn that part inside out yet, only because you have to insert the straps from the center front into the back. So when you do that, make sure that you're crisscrossing it from one side to the other. And when you insert it, you can insert it just so that like the tip of the strap comes out. And from there you can pin it so that it stays in place. And you'll be able to stitch straight across so that it's secure, it stays in place. And that would be it for the bodice. We can move on to the skirt. I decided to add a waistband to the waistline just to give it a little bit more structure. Only because I didn't want the gathers to come up without having something there to secure it. I don't know, in my mind mentally I'm like, it needed a waistband, but in the end it worked out well. So yeah, I went ahead and I cut one out. If you don't feel like it's needed, then by all means do your thing, and just make sure that that waistline is secure and it stays in place, whether it is that you're using, you know, hook and eye above that zipper. But I like having a clean edge, so the waistline for me was the best thing to do. Always make sure you add your notches, mark your seam allowance, your overlap, along with where the bodice itself will end. Go ahead and sew that straight across, and then you can sew your lining into place. My lining was a little bit bigger, so I went ahead and I added pleats instead of gathers so that it would lay down smooth. I didn't want to gather the lining alongside with the actual shell because sometimes that makes the waistline too bulky. So I went ahead and I just added the simple pleats. Once you're done with that, you can add your zipper. For the lap zipper, there is another video which I've linked down below on how you can put a lap zipper together, just in case this doesn't show the whole thing or you're not able to see it. The other video is a lot more thorough since it simply focuses on how to sew a lap zipper. But anyway, add your zipper, and then once your zipper is added, then you're ready to gather the fabric. So you have to add your stitch lines, you know, 2 base stitches going horizontally across the waistline, and then from there you pull the threads at the end to gather them up. Once you've created your 2 basting stitches, make sure that your thread is long enough at the end, and you can tie the 2 bobbin threads together, and on the other side of the fabric you can tie the 2 stitch or 2 needle threads together, I guess you could say. Gathering is very tedious. And it's also very fragile because if the thread breaks, then you're kind of stuck. The only way to do it, the only way to fix it is to stitch over that section again and tying the threads together so that you can continue to gather. But even with that, like, it becomes very difficult. So just be very gentle. It's almost as if you're moving the fabric down the thread. So like, think of it like when you're putting a curtain up on the rod and you move it down the shaft. So that's what you're doing, and the thread itself has already interwoven between the fabric, so sometimes it breaks. So just be very careful. Move it bit by bit until you get the desired measurement that you want. With that being said, once you gather it, it's very hard for you to tell where the center front is. So before you start to gather, make sure you put your fabric together so that you can pinpoint your center front, your side seam, so that once it's gathered, you just know exactly where those markings are and the gathers are evenly distributed within all 4 quadrants. Once you've gathered and it fits the measurements that you wanted, then you're ready to add it to the waistband. You're ready to line up the gathers to the waistband. Make sure that you have pins in place to keep it nice and steady. Be careful with it because the gathers can easily shift out of place, but hopefully you have made them nice and secure with the pins. And if need be, if you feel like it's very shifty on you, you can always add a stay stitch. Stay stitch the gathers from the shell onto the lining, just so that you know you're working with one piece of material versus 2 things that could potentially move out of place and give you a different measurement in the end. Once you are done attaching it to the waistband, there's going to be a ton of frays if you've decided to use chiffon fabric like I did. Be sure to trim that off. Clean it off with a nice pair of shears so that you don't have any extra frays or thread hanging off. Just clean it to your best of your ability. From there, once you've trimmed it, once you've trimmed the seam allowance too, you can iron it down so that it's nice and smooth, and then you'll be able to fold it over so that you can finalize your waistband. You guys, we are almost at the end. Once you are done with the waistband, you can go ahead and fold it over. Well, after you finish trimming and cleaning, you can go ahead and fold it over the actual lining of the fabric. When you fold it over, make sure that that folded edge is falling onto your original waistline stitch. Pin it in place so that it's secure. Add as many pins as possible so that you know that there's nothing shifting out of place. From this point on, we'll be hand stitching it down. We're gonna do a ladder stitch. The ladder stitch is only going to go through the folding of the waistband, and it's gonna penetrate the lining and come back out into the waistband, so it will not show on the opposite side of the actual band. It actually won't show at all. It'll technically be like an invisible stitch, but it's just going to stay in the middle. So with your thread and needle, go ahead and start from the very edge. You can create a ladder stitch so that it's going the same direction as your zipper, just so that that folded edge is nice and secure and that it stays in place. If you want to use the sewing machine to stitch this down, by all means do so, but I like to finish my waistbands with hand stitching because it comes out extremely clean, and it's just neat, and I like the look of it. So it's up to you. If you want to rush through it and be done, you could just go ahead and use your sewing machine. If you can ditch stitch, by all means go ahead. I don't like to ditch stitch because I find it I find it hard to do. Not necessarily hard, but you really have to have a steady hand, and you have to make sure that that needle is falling exactly where you need it. There's too many variations, especially if the fabric is bulky, things can shift out of place, and then you have to unstitch and restitch, and it's just too much. So with that, I would rather just take my time and hand stitch it, make sure that it's nice and neat the very first time around. I did not roll the hem. I simply did like a burnout with a hot ironing tip, which I can show you at a later time. But I did do a photo shoot for this garment for my birthday last year. Here are the images. If you have any questions, do list them down below. And yeah, that is it for today. Subscribe, like, and share, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.